Hello YouTube, Dave here again. It's been about 3 years since I started uploading videos for my YouTube channel, and a lot's kind of changed in those 3 years. I'd like to think that I've gotten a little bit better at coming up with reviews and doing things along those lines, and for a while now I've wanted to actually go back and revisit some of the earlier things that I did reviews for. Most because I don't think I necessarily judged them fairly at the time, or I don't think I did a good enough job kind of describing what they're about, and I really feel that in the item that I was probably the harshest on, and one that I've actually come and changed my opinions on a fair amount actually over the course of these past 3 years, is the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition starter set. So what I'd like to do is basically go back and sort of re-review it and make it so that's a video that's solely based on the 5th edition starter set, whereas before I spent several minutes showing off other items in my D&D collection first. I also spent quite a bit of time comparing it to other starter sets that I had for previous editions, and again that was a separate, or that was all done before I got to talk about this itself. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is just take a look at the contents, discuss everything that comes with it, and give my updated view on the usefulness of this item. Alright, so here we have the 5th edition starter set. First thing I'd like to say is that I really love the artwork on the cover. This is one of the nice, coolest looking green dragons I've ever seen. It's really well done, really intimidating. You've got the fighter there who's bravely standing it down, but it doesn't look like it's going particularly well for them. On the back, you also have a really awesome picture of an ogre, and I actually really like the redesigned ogre. This one actually matches very closely to the one that was in the Dungeon Command set, Blooded Grimish. So again, I just really like the way that they made the ogres look. It's just a really cool look to it. On the back you also see little previews of some of the maps that are contained within the adventure book itself, and just a little preview of all the things that are inside. It does list the full components, which we'll go over here shortly, but the blurb here on the back just says, explore subterranean labyrinths, plunder hordes of treasure, battle legendary monsters. The Dungeons & Dragons starter set is your gateway to action-packed stories of the imagination. This box contains the essential rules of the game, plus everything you need to play heroic characters on perilous adventures in the worlds of fantasy. So again, pretty cool. So inside, we have something I actually have set aside here, but one of the things that actually comes inside is just a little advertisement. Now this advertisement is for a program called D&D Encounters, which no longer exists. It was their organized play before D&D Adventurers League. It does have, I guess what's called a QR code, I think is the name for it. I don't know what this does. I've never actually scanned it, so if anybody knows, certainly let me know in the comments. But on the back it has a blank character sheet. Now it's only a single page character sheet, but it is a nice inclusion because you can photocopy it, and if you want to make your own characters, then this is a half decent sheet to be able to do that with. Now it does again say D&D Encounters, but you can simply ignore that and just use it as a template for brand new characters of your own design. Also inside is a set of 6 dice, and one of the things I actually really like is the dice themselves are not just sort of the standard flat colors that they've had in the past, where they had each of the dice were typically multicolored. This one actually has the same dice that you used to be able to buy as official sets, which is again really cool looking. I actually really like this dice. The only thing that I would say is a minor complaint is that it doesn't have the percentile dice. Now nothing in the starter set I don't believe uses percentiles, but it still would have been nice to have had that included, make it a set of 7 dice. But still, again, these are actually really nice dice. We also have in here the starter set rulebook. And then now when I did my initial review, I don't think I judged the usefulness of this book properly. I looked at this as something that would be pretty well useless for people that go out and buy the player's handbooks and all of that. Now the one thing that I really wasn't considering at the time is that when this book, or when this starter set came out, the player's handbook wasn't actually released yet. This came out about a month beforehand. Now another thing that I never really considered is some people may not actually end up buying the player's handbook just due to things like lack of interest, or because perhaps it's just too expensive. I mean, it's for people living in Canada, it's over $60 to get the player's handbook. Wizards of the Coast do have the basic rules available as a free downloaded PDF that some people, I'm sure, are using to this day, rather than spending the money on the actual physical books, where again, that is very expensive to go through. So this is actually a really great resource for individuals who are using the basic rules and only using the basic rule set. Because again, this goes over all of the information on the combat system. It goes over the ability scores as well, all of the different ability scores, as well as descriptions on each of the skills associated with them. So for example, if you look at strength, it mentions athletics, dexterity goes over acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, intelligence. So this actually describes all of the skills as well. In addition to that, it goes over the combat system in a fair amount of detail, actually. And there isn't necessarily a whole lot in this booklet that wasn't duplicated in the player's handbook, or that the player's handbook has, that this one doesn't necessarily have either. So this is, again, a pretty comprehensive combat system. Goes over all the information of things that you would need. The only thing it doesn't really go over, just flipping through it, it doesn't look like it features things like grabbing or grappling or things of that nature. Let me just see if I can find it, because I may be wrong. Range attack rules. Yeah, so it looks like it doesn't go over things like grapples or stuff like that, but that's always been a mechanic that, I'll be honest, rarely gets used in campaigns that I've run, usually because it tends to be convoluted. But again, this booklet does have a lot of great stuff in here. It's got a pretty decent armor and weapons charts. The only thing that seems to be missing from the heavy armor doesn't have things like the plate mail. But still, it's got a pretty comprehensive list, again, of all of that stuff. Adventuring gear, food and lodging, including lifestyles, so squalid, poor, modest, comfortable, wealthy, or aristocratic. So again, it goes into a fair amount of detail as far as that goes. It also has spell lists and spell descriptions, as well as a description of the magic system and how certain things work, like material components, casting, concentration, saving throws, attack rolls, things of that nature. And it does feature up to 3rd level spells. So again, this can be useful for starting characters, even if you're playing brand new characters that you make of your own design. So while this may not be the most useful resource for individuals that have the physical copies of the player's handbooks, the hardcovers, for anyone that's using just the PDFs, the free PDFs, this is a handy resource to have on hand. So if you're an individual that's not looking to buy the player's handbooks, just wants to use the free PDFs, then purchasing this gives you a pretty decent rulebook to use without having to print stuff off yourself. Up next, I want to talk about the characters that are included. So there are 5 characters, and these characters are made using the basic rules, again, that can be downloaded for free, where, again, those basic rules were the only things that were released at the time that the starter set had come out. This covers the major, or the, I don't want to say cliched, but the typical races and classes that are known for, throughout Dungeons & Dragons history. So we've got the first character that we have is a dwarf cleric. So it goes over all the basic information here, fills out their personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, all of their information based off their race, class, and background. And on the back, we actually have a useful little bit of information about the things such as the race, some examples of names if you can't think of a name for yourself. I find anything that has a list of names to be super useful, because I've always been terrible trying to come up with names. It also goes over information about the cleric itself, as well as the background. And what's really cool about all of the characters, I'm not going to go through and read them in detail, but each of the characters has a background pre-written for it that actually ties it into the adventure that's included in the book, which is something that I actually really like. It also has information on what happens when they gain levels, all the way up through to 5th level, which is pretty decent for a starter set, since most of them in the past have only focused on getting up to 3rd level. This one actually gives you a couple extra levels of play before you would move on to either the basic rules or the player's handbook, and it just goes over all the different things that you get for each level. So again, pretty well designed, and Dwarf Clerics are kind of one of my go-to race class combinations when designing NPC, so I actually really like that quite a bit. The next character that I wanted to show off here is the Human Fighter Folk Hero. So there are two different fighters included in this starter set. This particular one is the one that I would probably end up playing myself if I were to play this as a player, because this is the archer, essentially. So this is, while it's a human fighter and can wear heavy armor and things of that nature, this particular character is just wearing leather armor, has a longbow, as well as a greatsword, so a two-handed weapon. Dexterity is their main ability score. And it's just, again, it's an archer, and archers are one of my favorite classes. I would dare say if this starter set were to be redone nowadays, with the Player's Handbook having been released, this would probably be replaced by an actual ranger. But again, it's still a pretty decent character. Makes for a nice archer. Again, on the back it has information on the humans. It has a few names, even though it doesn't really go into a lot of detail, because human names have always been sort of derived from other races. In the D&D game at least, but it has information on the fighter, and again the background and the level up information, which again for fighters isn't quite as much as what the clerics would get. Alright, the next one that we have here is the Human Fighter Noble. So the archer character was a folk hero, the dwarf was a soldier, and this character is actually a noble, which is interesting. It's actually an interesting design to have this as a noble instead of like another soldier, for example. Obviously, as a more traditional fighter wearing heavy armor, such as chainmail, dexterity is quite low, probably one of their lowest ability scores actually, where it has a penalty. However, heavy armor you don't apply the penalty to, which is always pretty good. So if you are wearing heavy armor, you don't need to worry about the dexterity as much. Now this character, this fighter, does use a great axe as a default weapon and has some javelins as well. So this is one of the things, I'm not quite sure that this is how I would build this particular character. This is probably the character that I think needs the most of a redesign, simply because it has things such as the defensive fighting style. Now I don't think the great weapon fighting style for using two-handed weapons was available in the basic rule set, so I can kind of see why they did it, but it doesn't really complement being a two-handed fighter so much as it would if you were using a sword and a shield. So I think that's the only thing that they probably should have done with this, since the other fighter also had a two-handed weapon. I would have much preferred this one to be what's I've heard referred to in the past as a sword and board character, using a one-handed weapon and a shield. But that's sort of the only nitpick that I have. Again, I still actually like the background quite a bit. With it being a noble instead of like a soldier and things like that, it just makes for sort of an interesting character, I think, and I think that's actually a really cool way that they designed this particular fighter. And again, it just has the information, which is very similar to what the folk hero would get. Alright, up next we have another, unfortunately, stereotypical race, class, and background combination. So we have the Halfling Rogue Criminal. So this is your kind of stereotypical rogue, uses a short sword, leather armor, and is all about being sort of, sneaky, and of course has that criminal background. So with the criminal background, it has like criminal contact, which again is pretty cool. It's something that the DM can work with, and I believe is already factored into the starter set adventure as well. On the back, we just have information again on the halflings, including some halfling names. We've got information on the rogues, and of course the backgrounds, which again is really cool. And your level up information for all of the levels through levels 2 through 5. So which again is pretty great. And then up next we have the last character, I believe, because yeah, I just have just some blank sheets that I keep stored in that box as well. But the last character that we have is the High Elf Wizard, which has the Acolyte background, which again is pretty typical, but it makes sense. So they obviously went that route, and I believe they made use of all of the backgrounds that are available in the starter or the basic rules as well, which is great. So there's no overlap in background types. What I like about this wizard is there's a lot of potential to role-play mode as well, where he uses polysyllabic words to convey to convey the expression of erudition. It's not a word I've actually ever come across before. I'll have to look that up. Also, I've spent so long in the temple that I have little experience dealing with people on a casual basis. So I actually like this guy quite a bit. He's a pretty cool build. You know, again, they use all the same kind of, I believe, standard array for the ability scores. But again, this is a really cool character. I actually like the wizard quite a bit. And on the back, you've got information on elves, names, wizard information, background, and your level up information there as well. So the characters actually I like a lot better than ones that have been included in previous starter sets. The two starter sets that I have that had pre-built characters were for 3.0 and 3.5, and they all relied on just sort of having the iconic characters that were part of like the player's handbook, like Jozan, Regdar, Tordek, Melee, all of those characters. So I'm actually kind of glad that they, even though again some of them fall into similar archetypes, I like the way they're designed, and I like the fact that they have backgrounds that actually tie into the adventure itself, which makes you feel more a part of the world than just being sort of a generic character with little else to go on. So again, that's actually really cool. I really like that quite a bit. Now in my starter set, I actually ended up getting a second copy of the Noble Fighter. So I actually ended up having 6 character sheets, even though this one is the exact same as the other one. So it was just basically an error with the way this one's packaged. But there we go. I have a spare fighter noble sheet if I ever need it. So the last thing that I really want to talk about is the adventure itself, the Lost Mine of Phandelver. And I can honestly say that this is probably one of the best, if not the best, adventure to come in a starter set that I've ever had the opportunity to read. So I actually really love this adventure. The basic overall premise is the player characters are attempting to assist a group of dwarves, family dwarves by the name of the Rockseekers, I believe is their last name, particularly Gundren Rockseeker, to uncover this ancient mine that's been lost to history. And as you go through, there's different opportunities for adventure as you go through. So it's, you know, actually a pretty decent plot for an early first level adventure, which is something that I really like. The characters basically are a day or so behind Gundren, as he leaves before them to go to head to the town of Phandelver. On the way, obviously, they're ambushed, bad things happen. The player characters discover that goblins have captured Gundren and his assistant that was going with him. So the player characters actually have, very early on in the adventure, they actually have a choice as to what they want to do. The player characters are sent by Gundren to Phandelver with provisions that he wanted for his expedition, I guess you could say. And I think to resupply potentially a store that they own as well. It's been a while since I've actually read the adventure, but one of the things that I like about this is that after you discovered that Gundren has been captured, the characters actually have to decide what they're going to do with their caravan, with their wagon. Do they just find a place to hide it and go after the goblins, or do they take the wagon to Phandelver first before coming back? So it's actually the fact that, you know, even that early on, there's a potential to make a choice. Now, as the characters go after the goblins that captured Gundren, they enter Crag Maw hideout, where they explore through. Gundren isn't there. He's actually already been taken. But they do have the opportunity to save his friend, the one that the human that accompanied him, by the name of Sildar Hallwinter. So they have the ability to save him. Now, once they do that, again, at that point, they will return back to Phandelver to find out, you know, kind of what to do next. And this is, again, another part that I actually really like, because in the town of Phandelver, the player characters have opportunities to go through several different adventures, several different opportunities to do things. They can interact with the NPCs and get quests from them. For example, if they go to the Miners' Exchange, they can get a quest from Halia. So Halia's job offer is, if approached by the characters she believes she can control, Halia explains that the Red Brands are a problem. So the Red Brands are a group of basically thugs that have taken up residence in the town of Phandelver. And so one of the quests can be to confront them, kind of deal with them, drive them out. At some point they are going to confront the player characters, so it does have, you know, their hideout to go through, as well as confronting their leader. Now, I'm not going to spoil too much in this, just because, you know, again, some people may want to go through and either play through it or run through it, and I think it's important that you kind of discover a lot of this yourself. But after that, there's also a bunch of different side quests that the player characters can go on. For example, they can, you know, go after a specter, I believe, or a banshee. Can't quite see. Yeah, she's actually a banshee, and, you know, deal with the banshee, probably in a role and potentially a role-playing scenario. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a combat scenario, which is again is something that I think is pretty cool. They have the ability to interact with Agatha, the banshee, to learn information, which is something that again I think is really cool. They also have the ability to, at this point, confront a green dragon. And what's interesting about this is that the green dragon encounter is, I think, foreshadowed by an interaction with Cult of the Dragon members. And what's really cool about that is that it kind of foreshadows the first official campaign to be released by Wizards of the Coast, which was the Tyranny of Dragons storyline with Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. So that actually has a potential to, again, kind of foreshadow that. But basically, the player characters can go on these side quests to learn information that can point them in the direction of one of the final places they go to, which is Cragmaw Castle, before they go to the actual Lost Mine itself, which we have here as Wave Echo Cave. So the player characters basically go through that. They have the ability to rescue Gundren, I believe, as they go through this, and you know, confront the individual that's actually masterminding everything that's going on here. So again, it's actually a pretty cool adventure, and it's great that they give you again, different options. So throughout the course of the adventure and dealing with the residents of Phandelver, the player characters have the opportunity to be approached by members of the various factions, being the Zentarum, the Order of the Gauntlet, Lord's Alliance, Emerald Enclave, and the Harpers, which are part of, again, the organized play system, uses them as well. So it's interesting that, again, they have them in there. The player characters can be approached, they can receive offers to join, and what's great is, again, the player characters actually have choices that they can make throughout the course of this starter set adventure, whereas most starter set adventures are pretty heavily scripted or railroaded, you could say. This one gives the player characters options, which is, again, something that I think is really cool, and it's something that really can't be understated how great that is, especially for something like this, which is meant to be an introduction to the Dungeons & Dragons game. So this is something that, again, really, I think, more accurately represents how Dungeons & Dragons adventures can play out than previous incarnations of the starter set. So if you haven't had a chance to play Lost Mine of Phandelver yet, I recommend it. If you're, you know, even for experienced DMs, this is still a pretty fun adventure, and it's something that you can kind of work some of your own stuff into if you're more comfortable doing that. But I actually really like this, and I haven't had a chance to run it in full yet. I ran parts of it when I first got it a few years back, but I'd really like to be able to go through and actually run the adventure in its entirety. So that's the adventure itself. Again, I don't want to go too much into spoiler territory. It's something that, you know, it can play differently for different groups depending on the side quests the player characters end up going through finding, because you don't have to necessarily go through each of the ones that are available. So again, they have the opportunity to kind of pick and choose which ones they go through based on their interactions. So again, that's something that I think is really great. Overall, I think that this is a pretty decent starter set. You know, the negative things that I had said about it in the past do hold up a little bit. I'm still disappointed that, you know, half the box is taken up with this particular, let's just blank cardboard spacer. It would have been nice to have had something else included. I'm always someone who wants to have fold-out maps available to show off, even if it's something like the town of Phandelver itself. Or something to support use with miniatures. But one of the things that I hadn't actually quite considered that I think is pretty clever is you can take the spacer out and it will actually hold some of the adventure books. So for example, if you're running Horde of the Dragon Queen, or more appropriately, if you're running the Prince of the Apocalypse adventure, or the Elemental Evil storyline, Elemental Evil storyline can actually pick up pretty well directly after the starter set, which is something that the Horde of the Dragon Queen or the Tyranny of Dragons campaign didn't actually really do. So if you wanted to run Elemental Evil after Lost Mine of Phandelver, it meshes together pretty well. It takes place in the same region of Faerun, whereas the Horde of the Dragon Queen takes place in more of a southern region altogether. So if you have the starter set, and after you run Lost Mines of Phandelver, you want to start running Prince of the Apocalypse, then I've seen a video where somebody pulled out the cardboard insert and actually put the Prince of the Apocalypse book in there, and everything else actually fit on top of it quite nicely. One of the other things that I was actually, again, pretty harsh about when I first started running, or not when I first started running, when I first started reviewing and reviewed this product in particular, was the lack of ability to create your own characters, and I felt kind of shortchanged by that. However, again, I didn't really take the time to appreciate the amount of design that actually went into the pre-made characters. As far as pre-made characters go, these are probably some of the best ones that I've ever seen. And again, having background information's already, spelled out for you that ties you into the adventure itself is a pretty clever thing that I have to say I actually respect quite a bit that they actually ended up doing that. So they did include, again, the blank character sheet, and this works well if you download the basic rules and want to make your own character there, because you could choose a different race class combination. So perhaps you want to have an elven fighter or a dwarf rogue or things along those lines. It does at least give you a blank sheet to be able to do that with, which is something that other starter sets didn't necessarily do either. They didn't really give you those opportunities, or something that you could copy as just a blank sheet to be able to do stuff with. So I will say that as harsh as I was on that aspect of the starter set, I've really kind of changed my mind on that. And again, I've earned a new appreciation for the pre-generated characters that come with it, as well as what the actual intention of having this blank character sheet was, because there was the free PDF that was released alongside of it. Overall, this is actually a really decent starter set, and again, as harsh as I was on it, it has actually become probably my favorite starter set in terms of the characters and the adventure that Wizards of the Coast has actually released for the different editions. So again, I changed my mind on this, and I recommend this to pick up. Now, the downside is the price is still a little bit higher than I would like. I think if they would have had this as like $15.99 US and $20.99 or $17.99, like just knocked a couple of dollars off of the overall price, then this would have been perfect. Now that said, I was able to get a second copy of this that I have actually still sealed, that I got from Chapter's online website, and through a promotion that they had with their point system, I ended up getting it for around $5, which was pretty awesome. But this starter set is great if you're a new DM, you're new to the Dungeons & Dragons game. It has an excellent adventure in here that's easy to run, easy to follow, but still something that feels like the players have a little bit more input as to what they do than other starter sets have had. For experienced Dungeon Masters, again, you may not get as much enjoyment out of the starter set. You're probably not going to get any use out of the rulebook that comes in, but the Lost Mine of Phandelver is actually a really great adventure that I think you would still be able to have a lot of fun with, even if you are experienced and somebody that's been DMing for quite some time. Again, I'm hoping at some point that I'll be able to run that adventure in its entirety. So again, that was sort of my updated view on the starter set. I really, again, think that I was a bit too harsh on it back when I first reviewed it. I've had some time to read through it and earn a new appreciation for it, and it's something that I'm now glad that I bought. And at first I kind of regretted having it, but now it's one of the more favorite items that I actually have in my 5th edition collection. So if you don't have this yet, but you want to have at least a really decent adventure, as well as a set of dice and something that you can do with people that are new to the game, then I highly recommend this starter set, because again, I think it's actually a lot better than I initially gave it credit for. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.